All right. Well, as you know, waste is a big problem. We have over 380 billion plastic bags and 60 billion single-use drinks are used every year just in the United States alone, and about 17 million barrels of oil are needed to create all of those bottles just used by Americans. One way to think about it is the archaeologists of the future will have a new geological era of waste when they go around digging. So when you think about the Grand Canyon and you see all the different layers in the Grand Canyon from the different eons of Earth's evolution, humanity and the Anthropocene are having an effect, and whether it's on land or in the ocean, there is now a new archaeological layer of waste for future generations to dig through and to learn about our community and culture. Sadly, only about 7% of those bottles get recycled. So it's important that we and clean up our recycling programs, but also reduce our dependency on single-use items. Greensboro does have one of the highest rates of contamination in the nation, and it's an issue we have on campus. And I know there's a lot of talk and controversy about corporations greenwashing their efforts, and that's very much true, but we're all a part of this, and what we do as consumers is equally an important factor in the circular economy. If we want recycling costs to decrease and to have more companies incorporate recycled material into their products, then we have to recycle properly. That means keeping our cups and containers clean before we putting them in the recycling bin, and avoiding wish cycling, which is, everybody wants to do what's important and what's best for the world, and they hope that an item is recyclable, even though they don't necessarily know 100% for sure if it is. And so they just put it in the recycling, and it turns out it's not recyclable, and that contaminates our waste stream, our recycling stream. And the more contamination there is in the stream, the more likely it is to go into the landfill. Even if, so the important thing to remember is even if an item has a recycling symbol on it, like styrofoam will frequently have a number 6 on it. And that just tells you what the material is made out of. It does not actually tell you if it is recyclable or not. And I have a little slide later on that talks about the different types of plastics. The other issue is that each municipality has contracted with a different waste management service whose processing capabilities can vary widely. So what's recyclable here in Greensboro may not necessarily be recyclable in Winston-Salem, just down the street. If you do live in Greensboro, if you live off campus in Greensboro, the city has this great app, and we'll talk about it a little later, called GSO Collects. The logo looks just like that, and it's available on the Google Play and Apple app stores. There's also a mobile version of this. A web-based version of this, and you can use it to search for items like coffee cup, paper plate, plastic cup, and it will tell you if it can or can't be recycled. And there are some differences between what the city collects and what we collect on campus, and we'll talk about those at the end of our time here. So just always be sure, if you're on campus, to review our recycling guide, and I'll put a link to the chat in that later. UNCG on average recycles about 200 tons of commingled material annually, and we have an overall landfill diversion rate of about 40%. It wavers, between 35 and 40% every year. It went up with the pandemic when we had more single-use items in dining and all of the protective equipment that we were wearing. But on the flip side, bottle sales in 2008 across campus had trended down, and they were down 21, almost 22%. So we're seeing fewer purchases of single-use items on campus. We do have an aim of becoming zero waste on campus by 2050. And of course, that doesn't mean that we're not going to have things that are going to be at the end of their useful life, or that we're trying to have like zero single-use plastic bottles in the cafeteria or in any of our grocery stores. It just means that we're trying to be as responsible as possible when dealing with that waste and avoiding sending it to the landfill. So we'll recycle it, we'll repurpose it. Sometimes we resell it. We have programs in the dorms, like the annual Cram and Scram. We haven't done it since the pandemic, but that gives students an opportunity to donate things to the university, who in turn either resells it at a cheap cost to members of the community or donates it to Goodwill on behalf of the students when they move out at the end of the spring semester. I hope that we're going to reinstall that this year, since we're kind of coming out of the pandemic. So zero waste really refers to prevention just as much as it refers to the end of pipe waste management system. So there are a lot of different things that we can do to increase our reuse of items, from shopping bags, glass jars. If you look down the bottom left corner, you can use, it says a cloth bowl cover, but I've found that like beeswax seals are really great. It works just like plastic wrap to get some beeswax, quote unquote plastic wrap. And of course, using, avoiding coffee pods and plastic tea bags and stuff like that. Again, I'm going to try to Cradle to Cradle is just talks about how we need to count on manufacturers to incorporate the reuse and recycling of their materials and their products. So I think of companies like Herman Miller that make chairs, and they have 10-year warranties on their chairs, and they replace parts, and the parts that they replace get recycled back at the factory and put into new chairs. And so that is a great example of what we call the circular economy. So just some info on how recycling works. The first step is collection. And, I guess it was probably in the 80s, 90s, we moved away from sorting our recycling, for, just putting plastic in one bin, glass in another, metal in another, and we've gone into commingled recycling, and that's been a big push from the waste management firms who developed new technologies that they implemented in their materials receiving facilities that are meant to make it easier to sort machines. And it was all kind of under the intention of making it more easy for citizens to recycle. And it's actually kind of had the opposite effect, because people are just putting everything into one bin, and recycling is absolutely confusing. And so that's how we're getting a lot of contamination, when it's actually a lot more clear to put things like just sort your plastic, sort your glass, and sort your metal, and be done with it. So plastics are usually sorted in a few common ways, depending on the type of plastic, the color of the plastic, or even how it was made. Different types of plastics must be processed in different ways, and some of the recycling facilities are only capable of recycling one or two types of plastic. So if the wrong type of plastic is processed, it can reduce the efficiency of the whole process. They wash the plastic, so it's to remove it of impurities. So any leftover yogurt or soda that might be in bottles, all that gets washed. And then they resize it. So this consists of shredding or granulating the plastic waste into smaller particles. This increases the surface area of the plastic, making it easier to process, reshape, and transport if needed. It also gives recycling facilities, a last opportunity to remove any plastic waste that has made it through the first non-plastic waste that has made it through the first 3 steps of processing. They use metal detectors and magnets and all kinds of stuff to remove materials. And then the process, then it turns into identification, separation of plastics. And there are several ways that they identify these things. So the first is just to test the density, and they can use different laser sensors to do that, or by floating particles in a large tank of water. So particles less dense than the water will float, and those that are more dense will sink. Then they determine their classification. It's really about how thick or thin the plastic is, and this is done by dropping the particles into small wind tunnels, and smaller pieces will fly higher up the tunnel than bigger ones will remain lower. They also test and separate by color and their melting point. And then they, I'm trying to read all of this and kind of summarize it at the same time. But then they compound them, which is turning smaller particles are crushed and melted together into plastic pellets. And then the pellets are really what gets sold on the market. As I mentioned earlier, this is the most kind of informative slide, but certainly not the entirely accurate or has everything on there as far as the different types of plastic that can be found. So, so if you see a number 7, that can really be anything. It's kind of the catch-all for we don't really know what kind of plastic. I mean, the manufacturers know what it is, but as far as us being able to identify it as consumers, it would be almost impossible to really know what a number 7 is. So we may only have 1 through 7 numbers on our single-use plastic items, but there are certainly many, many more types of plastic than just 7 in that get used across the globe. So the total generation of municipal solid waste in 2018 in the United States was almost 300 million tons, or about 5 pounds per person per day. So, that's what you are responsible for. In just over 12 years, we could cover 100% of Texas with 1 pound of trash per square foot. And to cover the US, it would take approximately 180 years. That doesn't sound too long, but that's that's less time than the United States is old. So in the grand scale of human time frame, that is not that long of a time. Of course, we don't recycle a lot of that. About 68% of our waste still goes into the landfill. About 24% gets recycled, and another 8.5–9% gets composted. There are almost 90 million tons of municipal solid waste were recycled and composted, which is about 32% of our entire waste stream. So I know things are, it looks bad. Like we've only done, we sent 68% in the landfill, but I think it's really important that we do focus on the positive. You read a lot of articles in the news that say recycling isn't worth it, that it's a waste of time, that the vast majority of it goes into the landfill. And some of that is partially true. Yes, if we don't clean up our waste stream, it does go into the landfill. But we still, recycling does work. The market can work. We just have to be more efficient and more responsible in shaping that market. There's no need to stop recycling. We just have to do a better job of it. Because I think 30%, 24% recycled, 9% composted, and that's a really good diversion rate, and we can increase that. Food is one of the largest components of landfill. So I'm not going to really get into too much of that, but you need to be responsible shoppers at the store. We need to pressure grocery stores and our governments to be more mindful of their waste. Maybe, loosen up laws that restrict restaurants and grocery stores from donating food that is, maybe just a day past its recommended shelf life. I think this is some old repeating data. 50 billion bottles of water are being bought globally each year, and 80% of those end up in the landfill. Again, 17 million barrels of oil are used to produce bottles of water. So if we're talking about reducing our carbon footprint, recycling, or not just recycling, but reducing our dependency on single-use plastic items is also going to help reduce our carbon footprint. Of the 69 million tons of solid waste that was recycled in the US, paper and cardboard accounted for approximately 67% of that. Metals were about 13%, while glass, plastic, and wood made up about between 4 and 5%. The 20 million tons of composted material included approximately 22 million tons of yard trimmings. That's more than a 5-fold increase since 1990, and we're actually in the middle of raking our yards season right now. And I could not recommend strongly enough that you just leave the leaves in your yards. If you wanted to, you could run over them with a lawnmower and mulch them, but they actually provide safe haven for a lot of grubs and insects, which in turn helps feed birds. We're also in the middle of migration season. And really just by leaving leaves in your yard, you're creating an incredibly biodiverse habitat and ecosystem right in your yard that's going to support wildlife up and down the food chain. So please don't bag your leaves. Put them in your own, create your own compost at home, or like I said, mulch them or just leave them. I'm not going to really get into how metal is produced. We'll kind of go through this, but there's an extensive use of energy that is, and materials that are required both in the mining and shipping of ores like bauxite, which are used to make aluminum cans, from mining in Australia to being shipped to Sweden and Norway, where they get put into a smelter and then shipped to England, where the sheets of aluminum are punched into cans, and then they're shipped to bottlers across, either in England or across the ocean to the United States. There's sugar that gets put into our sodas and drinks, and there's all kinds of other stuff that's just going beyond water that goes into our single-use items. Mining is happening around the clock. Some companies use the same amount of electricity as a city of 100,000 people. So Greensboro is about 300,000 people. So again, reducing our consumption of single-use drinks is also helping reduce our impact on the planet, reducing our mining of natural resources. And it's also healthier for you. The cans are then filled and put into cardboard, which is made of forest pulp or wood, depending on how sustainably harvested or not those materials are. And then they're shipped to regional distribution warehouses, via large shipping vessels or trucks in the United States. Drinking the can of cola only takes a few minutes. Throwing the can away takes just a second. In England, consumers discarded 84% of all cans, which means that the overall rate of aluminum waste is about 88%. So you think about how long it takes to just, and the materials and energy that it takes just to get that can of soda into your hand, and that you drink it in just a few minutes, and then it's in the landfill where it could live the rest of its life, leaching with all of the other mess that's in the landfill. We still get 3/5 of our aluminum from virgin ore. That's about 20 times the energy intensity of recycled aluminum. Aluminum can be recycled infinitely. So unlike plastic, it does not have a very short life. It can be turned into cans again and again and again. what was the, we throw enough aluminum away to replace our entire commercial aircraft fleet in the United States every 3 months. You know, again, a lot of this stuff is, it may be very familiar with for some of you. I know I recognize a lot of names in the meeting, and I know that we have a lot of concerned citizens on this call, but you know, our trash does not just end up in the landfill, it does end up in our water systems, you know, our lakes and streams, and eventually into the ocean. There are 5 major oceanic gyres in the world, and 90% of the trash found in them is plastic. And it's estimated that about 80% of the plastic in the ocean comes from land sources, while only about 20% actually comes from ships at sea. I think the most popular one is known as the Great Pacific Garbage Vortex, and it's an area the size of Texas in the North Pacific, excuse me, the North Pacific Ocean. And it's estimated that there are about 6 kilos of plastic for every kilo of natural plankton, along with other slow degrading garbage, and it just swirls around slowly like a clock. So I'll show you a picture of some of the trash that Lena and other students and I just picked up last week here on campus in the North Buffalo Creek. We are part of the Haw River, we're part of the Cape Fear River watershed, and so plastic, as it breaks down into little pieces, it can float downstream and travel from Greensboro to the ocean. And plastic does not break down. And much like I said, how they sort plastic in the materials receiving facilities, the lighter plastic floats and the heavier plastic sinks. So we are also essentially creating landfills at the bottom of oceans where it's impacting the life that, crabs, sea urchins, all different kinds of sea life that lives on the bottom of the ocean floor. It's referred to as an island of trash. Basically, the currents, the global ocean currents, sweep up and down the coast and create a whirlpool. And the vast majority of the debris is actually small pieces of floating plastic that are not immediately evident to the naked eye. So this is what we call microplastics. A study in from the United Nations estimates that the Northeast Pacific region alone, there are about 46,000 floating pieces of plastic for every square mile of ocean, and the trash now circulates to a depth of 30 meters. Marine life can be caught and injured and potentially killed in certain types of debris. Lost fishing nets are especially dangerous, and they're often called ghost nets or sea tumbleweeds. This is what they look like. And there's a nice picture of a guy in there to give you kind of a sense of the scale. Again, this is kind of talking again about just reaffirming that these plastics do not break down. Bio-based plastics are the same in terms of polymer behavior, and they do not degrade any faster in the environment. While biodegradable plastics are designed to break down in a compost pile or landfill where there are high temperatures and suitable microbes to assist degradation, these are generally not designed to degrade in the ocean at appreciable rates. So just because you have something that is compostable, it's still going to take, it still has a certain lifespan that it's going to take to degrade. And it's more likely to do that in the landfill or the compost than it would in the natural environment. Here's a picture of some of the waste that can be found in the Pacific Garbage Patch. If you look at the middle picture there, that's a jar. You can see some plankton in there, and then and you can also see how the plastic is sorting itself. This is an albatross in the island of Midway that died from complications to an inability to digest plastic. and has mistaken small pieces of plastic for food, or it's scooped up the plastic as it's been fishing. And as I said, it cannot digest the plastic, and eventually it builds up inside of its stomach, and the bird eventually will die of starvation, essentially. It's very brutal. I know you guys were coming to expect more information about recycling in general, but I think it's important to kind of talk about the entire waste stream. As I mentioned, we are part of the, well, it says Haw River, but we're really part of the Cape Fear River basin and watershed. Just kind of talking about the geography, we have a great water reserves in the city, in Lake Higgins, Lake Brant, Lake Townsend. But all that water does eventually make its way to the ocean. The Cape Fear is one of 4 river basins entirely contained within North Carolina's borders. The river is formed by the Deep Rocky and Haw Rivers, which converge in Chatham County. The river ends in 32,000 acres of estuary near Southport. There are a number of large cities located within the basin, including Greensboro, High Point, Burlington, Durham, Fayetteville, and Wilmington. It covers more than 93,000 square miles, making it the state's largest. Let's see, and it includes all or portions of 26 counties and a population of about 3.6 million people. It once supported thriving migratory fish populations, including American shad, short-nosed sturgeon, Atlantic sturgeon, blueback herring, all kinds of stuff. But we've put up more than 1,100 dams and blockages to prevent migratory fish from moving upstream in the Cape Fear to spawn. Again, we're getting a little bit away from recycling. UNCG does receive water and sewer service from the city of Greensboro, and we own and maintain a distribution system that receives water through 3 city master meters and distributes it to over 60 buildings on campus. And of course, we have water service for outlying properties as well. Most of the buildings on campus have UNCG-owned water meters that are read, and data is subsequently entered into a database, and we track our monthly water consumption. And I think that's the end of the slide. So it kind of, this is a slide, there are a lot of different topics in this presentation that we kind of created for, just to be prepared to talk about any type of subject that we get asked to present about. I'm going to go ahead and I reshare my screen and show you what this Greensboro Waste Wizard looks like, and I'll put this in the chat for everybody. Again, we are on the UNCG mobile app, and if you look for the recycling symbol, you can find a link to this page in the app. And now we're going to kind of get into the nitty-gritty of how to use this, and what are some differences between the city and the university. So for those of you who live off campus, a number of years ago, the city decided to stop collecting glass bottles in the residential recycling program, and you now have to take it to one of several drop-off locations across the county. So, and they keep growing in number. So you can find all of those drop-off locations. We do still recycle glass on campus. So if you live in the dorms, or if you buy a Frappuccino or something like that from the Starbucks that comes in a glass bottle, you can recycle that on campus. We ask that you not bring your glass from home, though, because the reason that the city stopped accepting glass in the commingled bin is it was strictly a financial decision. We get charged per ton for all of the recycling material, and so glass is the heaviest material. Recycling rates have been increasing, and they're going up every year. And so the city made a financial decision in order to reduce their costs by removing the heaviest material from the single stream commingled recycling program. We at UNCG decided we don't really have that much glass. The majority of the glass is going to be coming from the dorms, where you're buying your pizza sauces and pasta sauces and stuff like that. And we still have a goal of becoming zero waste, and we just didn't really think it was going to impact us that much financially. But that's why we don't ask you to bring your glass from home, because it does cost the university money, and there are free places for you to collect glass from or to drop off your glass. When you're on campus, you can find a link to our recycling guide here. This is what you need to follow when you're on campus. If it has a 1, 2, or 5, you can recycle it. You can recycle glass bottles and jars, any paper, cardboard, and magazines, aluminum, tin, and steel. Things like food, styrofoam, straws, plasticware, paper plates, paper towels, cups, and wax paper cartons need to be put in the landfill. We do have drop-off locations for these items. So we accept batteries and ink cartridges. I know not many people have CDs or discs or cell phones that they want to recycle, but we do collect those. And we also collect plastic bags. We really just take our plastic bags to Harris Teeter. So that's where they're going to go. So if you're going to bring them from home, I would just recommend that you just bring them to Harris Teeter. Otherwise, I'm just going to end up taking them to Harris Teeter for you. There are going to be some weird things with the city. So if you come into the Waste Wizard and you type in number 5 plastic cups, they're going to tell you to put those in the green trash container. And my feeling is that is strictly about reducing contamination. A lot of people just throw their cups in with their sodas or their beer into the trash or into the recycling. That gets the cardboard wet. That means the cardboard isn't recyclable. That gets the same for the paper. And so they're really trying to just reduce contamination that way. If it's clean and it has a number 5 on it, you can recycle it on campus. The other thing that they're going to tell you is if you type in something like yogurt cup, and they're going to show you this kind of single serve yogurt, and they're going to tell you that needs to go in the trash. I would follow that. But however, if you type in number 5 plastic jug, or let's see, what were we calling it?
I think it was jugs, tubs,
that's what it was. Yeah. So if you type in plastic tub, it's also going to kick out things that are, some of you buy a large yogurt tub. So these are recyclable. You can recycle that. So if it has a number 5 on it, I think you're going to be fine. You don't need to worry too much about it. So the Waste Wizard can be kind of difficult to navigate, because if you just type in yogurt, it's going to tell you that it's recyclable. But the yogurt I buy, I don't buy single serve yogurt. I buy the big tubs like this that are pictured for the sour cream, and that is absolutely recyclable. So just keep that stuff in mind when you're on campus. Go by what's on our recycling guide, and when you're in the city, use the Waste Wizard. I think the vast majority of the time, what the Waste Wizard tells you to recycle, it's going to be accurate, and you should follow it. It also has information for where to take your computer. You can drop it off at the Electronic Waste Center, which is just not too far from Greensboro on Patterson, down by the Coliseum. We don't recycle styrofoam, but you can actually densify styrofoam, and there is a new drop-off location for densification. Yeah, and Angie, yes, the lids you need to keep on on the container. I would actually, I would kind of advise just maybe not recycling the lid, but you can. They also advise you to keep your bottle caps on, which is fine. There's some information out there that says that it's difficult for the machines to sort the lids because they do get detached, and they're flat, and so they're hard to be scanned. I don't think either way. I think if you chose not to recycle it, it would be fine, and I don't think it would necessarily be a large issue of contamination if you did recycle them as well. The major issue with contamination is food and items that are not recyclable at all. So, hard plastics, stuff like that. The tiny houses association, I forget the actual name of the company. It's right across from the Kaplan Center. They've been working with Greensboro Beautiful, and they received a grant to buy a densifier, and you can now drop off your styrofoam. It's a drive-up location in the back of their building, and you can just drop off your styrofoam there. They basically melt it down and they ship it off to a company that turns the styrofoam into things like picture frames or benches. Yeah, as I mentioned, I forgot I wanted to show you a picture of the trash we pulled out of the estuary to Buffalo Creek. Not estuary, tributary to Buffalo Creek, over by the tennis courts here. That's Lena there. So this probably all came from like the College Hill area. This is not trash that was generated on campus, so don't think like we've got a bunch of litter bugs on campus. That's just not true. A lot of the trash that we find in the waterways comes from the city. Bye, Ann, thank you. And is washed through our stormwater drain. So if you've ever been walking around town, you might see a picture of a little fish next to a stormwater drain, and it says drains into the creek. And that's what happens with stormwater when we get these huge rains. In order to avoid flooding our streets, we just flush that stuff into the into our creeks and rivers in the city, and that means if any trash is out there, it's going to get swept away and enter our water streams. So that's how the vast majority of trash ends up in the ocean. Okay, I think that's the end of my the presentation that I wanted to share with you. Do you guys have any questions, that stuff I didn't address? Feel free to unmute or turn on your cameras.
Sean, I think one thing I just want to note is, especially with recycling in the city, if you bag your recyclables, you need to take them out of that bag when you put them in the bin. So that's another big source of contamination that will often just, sometimes I've seen them not even pick the bin up.
Yes, thank you. That's a great point, Lena. You should be putting your recycling anywhere, whether it's on campus or in this, if you live in a home or apartment in the city, it should just be loose. Do not bag it. The plastic bags are only recyclable at Harris Teeter. They get shipped to a company that turns them into benches or a type of hard plastic material that gets used in outdoor decking. So they do get repurposed that way. Lena, were you going to say something else?
Yes, Angie did have a question on contamination a little bit earlier in the chat, and I do think that we covered the cleanliness of containers and recycling non-recyclable items. But do we know what the issue with Greensboro's high contamination rate is?
Yeah, and I see you asked a question about composting too. Thank you for showing that to me, Lena. So I always give people grace as far as knowing what can and can't be recycled. I go and I talk to a lot of student groups, Student Government Association, Residence Hall Association, Graduate Student Association, and I always ask, when you grew up at your home or at your school, did you have a recycling program? And I would say there's anywhere between 20 to 40% of them say that they didn't have a recycling program. If you live in a rural community, there may not be a program available to you to participate in recycling, and therefore you've never even had the opportunity to practice recycling or learn anything about it. And you only hear about, you only know what you hear about it on the news or from friends or from social media. And it can be really, and as I said, it can be really confusing. The numbers don't really necessarily mean anything. What can be recycled in one town can't be recycled in another. And so there's just a lot of misinformation, a lot of confusion. And I think people who even mean well, it's taken me decades to kind of understand all of this, to be in a position where I felt comfortable enough to do kind of a Q&A and to talk about it. And for somebody, particularly our students who are young and just kind of learning and getting engaged about these things, it's really hard to know what is and isn't recyclable. So I think just kind of our own ignorance, and it's not intentional ignorance, is part of that, Angie. Just not knowing, and then also being hopeful and wanting to do the right thing, and then just putting it in there. I try really hard not to focus on negative things, like thinking like people don't care. That's not true. There's a whole bunch of us here that care about it. People do recycle, people do it properly. And I think it's really important to focus on those positive things. Otherwise you can just like spiral mentally into a dark hole. The city does do a number of, one thing I've been trying to organize for a while, and it's just difficult to find the time, but we could volunteer with the city and go out on an audit with them. They do walk through neighborhoods and look into the recycling bins, and they'll put a little tag on it that says, if you're recycling improperly, and there is a 3 strikes rule. So they'll come back, they'll make a note, and they'll come back and check on you in a couple of weeks. And if you're still not recycling properly, they will remove your recycling bin from you. It's unfortunate that means all that material is then going to go into the landfill, but it's also better that they just don't contaminate the recycling stream with all of their trash. Now, you asked if we have a composting program. We do. Upstairs in the dining and Fountain View Dining, we compost pre and post consumer waste up there. So any of the like potato peels, carrot tops, all of that gets composted before it even comes out to be served. And then all the post-consumer waste, including your napkins, get chicken bones, meat, pork bones, all of the, everything, all of our food gets composted through Gallon's Family Farm, which is just outside Winston-Salem. We compost about 120 tons of material every year. We've tried to expand it in the dorms. Labor is a big deal. Like, how do we manage that waste stream? It's not built into, some of the dorms you might live in have chutes, like in Spartan Village, you have single trash rooms where you can leave your recycling or your trash. Some dorms don't have that. The students are responsible for taking the trash out to the dumpster behind their buildings. Others have the chutes, and we can't even really clean up our recycling stream. So it's really complicated to try to expand it into the dorms. We did a pilot project through the Green Fund in Mary Faust a couple years ago, and bins got left over break, over winter break, and there were gnats, and there were bad smells. And so to do that, it takes a lot of oversight and a lot of labor. And it's just stuff that, we don't have. We're kind of at capacity right now. And if you haven't heard, enrollment is down at the university, and there's a hiring freeze at the university. And we just, because we're dependent, our budget is dependent on enrollment. And so we just don't have the money to hire help. The same with the EUC. There actually isn't a kind of full service kitchen in the EUC dining facility. So that's why there's more single-use items there. So when we design our buildings, and if we remodel the EUC, we have to start considering those things of how are we going to manage our waste stream in those locations? Because right now we just don't even, there's not even a dishwasher behind the EUC. So, you know, if we wanted to use cups like we do upstairs in Fountain View, we don't. And there are some restrictions about how we can move, you know, food waste. And that includes the food waste on plates, you know, back and forth between buildings. And that's also a lot of labor if we even wanted to try to handle all of that. I mean, we have some of the largest restaurants in the city with the number of people that come through them on a daily basis. So there are just some things that we didn't plan for or think ahead on, like decades ago when we designed some of these things, because honestly, like, environmental stewardship wasn't as big of an important issue in the decades ago as it is today. Yeah, any other questions before we wrap up? Okay, thank you, Thomas. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Lena, for the technical support. I appreciate you. And we'll talk and see you guys again soon. Cheers.